Huh? They demand what? That they stop the barbarous behavior, insults, torture, forcible protest with blood writing, threatening, confinement, mass murdering, gun and machine gun shooting, using poison gas, germ weapons, experiment object of A-bombs. Wouldn't it be easy to prove that they have not experimented on them with A-bombs? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's quite a list, though. Yeah. All right, see ya. May 19th, 1952. Nobody thought this war would last this long on either side when it began in June 2 years ago. But this week is the 100th week of the Korean War. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, Mark Clark relieved Matt Ridgway as UN Commander and U.S. Far East Commander, but while that is big news, the main explosive news was coming from the UN's POW camp on Koje-Do Island, where communist prisoners kidnapped the camp commandant, General Francis Dodd. To recap, these were their demands in exchange for his release in the language in which they were written. 1. Immediately cease the barbarous behavior, insults, torture, forcible protest with blood writing, threatening, confinement, mass murdering, gun and machine gun shooting, using poisonous gas, germ weapons, experiment object of A-bombs. By your command. You should guarantee PW's human rights and individual rights with the base on the international law. 2. Immediate stopping the so-called illegal and unreasonable voluntary repatriation of NKPA and CPVA PWs. 3. Immediate ceasing the forcible investigations, screening, which thousands of PWs of NKPA and CPVA be rearmed and called in slavery permanently and illegally. 4. Immediate recognition of the PW representative group consisted of NKPA and CPVA PWs and close cooperation to it by your command. This representative group will turn in Brigadier General Dodd, USA, on your hand after we receive a satisfactory declaration to resolve the above items by your command. We will wait for your warm and sincere answer. Okay, afternoon of May 10, so still last week. Acting Camp Commandant Charlie Colson's noon deadline for Dodd's release passes without incident, and then Dodd phones Colson to present the prisoner's case. He does point out that there have, in fact, been cases where prisoners have been killed. So Colson's blanket denial of point 1 doesn't really fly. Dodd does say that, sure, most of the issues here are ones of semantics, fine. But until they clear them up, the communists will not let him go. He is sitting with the POW leaders, so he and they pass along all of their suggestions for making Colson's reply acceptable. Colson says, okay. So that is what they spend the entire afternoon doing. They finally get it to say this. 1. With reference to your item 1 of that message, I do admit there has been instances of bloodshed where many PW have been killed and wounded by UN forces. I can assure you, in future, that PW can expect humane treatment in this camp according to the principles of international law. I will do all within my power to eliminate further violence and bloodshed. If such incidents happen in the future, I will be responsible. 2. Reference to your item 2 regarding voluntary repatriation, that is a matter which is being discussed at Panmunjom and over which I have no control or influence. 3. Regarding your Site 3 pertaining to forcible investigation screening, I can inform you that after General Dodd's release, unharmed, there will be no more forcible screening or any rearming of PWs in this camp, nor will any attempt be made at nominal screening. 4. Reference to your item 4. We approve the organization of a PW representative group or commission consisting of Korean People's Army and Chinese People's Volunteer Army PW, according to the details agreed to by General Dodd and approved by me. So much time was spent with translating things and getting the wording right that by then the release time is 8 p.m. The POWs want to add one more thing, though, to what Regional Logistics Commander Paul Yount refers to as a comic opera. They want to keep General Dodd overnight so that they can have a ceremony in the morning. For his mediation help, they want to decorate him with flowers and escort him to the gate, and I am not making this up. Coulson says no. And at 9:30 p.m., General Francis Dodd walks out of Compound 76 and is whisked away to elsewhere, where he is to be held incommunicado. Most books about this war have plenty to say about this whole episode, but the episode isn't really over, and the aftermath is chock full of excitement. Let's look back at the whole situation first with a more analytical eye, shall we? I mean, first of all, the conditions at Koje-Do were not actually a secret to anyone, certainly not former UN Commander Matt Ridgway or U.S. 8th Army Commander Jim Van Fleet, despite Van Fleet saying May 5th that there was no cause for undue anxiety over Koje-Do. However, for weeks before this kidnapping drama, UNC personnel were unable to enter a bunch of the compounds there, and there was always the threat of violence. Walter Hermes calls Koje-Do a chronic appendix. Far East Command and 8th Army knew that it would have to be treated seriously at some point, but they preferred to let it go on until it became acute. When you think about it, Dodd probably was going to be captured at some point. I mean, the communist POWs had set up definite plans with several backups just in case, and his contacts with the prisoners laid him open to kidnapping, and as long as they refused to come out of their compounds to talk to him, it meant that unless he used force to bring the prisoner leaders out, he had to go to them or break off relations with them. In view of his orders to complete the fingerprinting and rostering of the prisoners and the disinclination to employ violent means, Dodd had little choice. Well, okay, but they could have maybe had better security, maybe locks on the gates, or at least a screen of guards between Dodd and the prisoners when they talked. He might not, in fact, have been snatched in that case. I'm guessing he maybe placed too much faith in the prisoner's good faith, or he was careless, or some combination of the two. Thing is, his kidnapping only really was important when he was used as a pawn with the threat of a mass prison break, that the communist side could air and get any demands met. You know how many armed troops the UN had surrounding the area? 11,000, and tanks and flamethrowers and all that stuff. But the POWs still managed to get some of what they wanted. It was a military matter that was settled politically on the prisoners' terms. It is evident that the communists knew what they wanted, and that Dodd and Coulson were more interested in preventing casualties than they were in denying political and propaganda advantages to the enemy. Unfortunately, the hurried and continual negotiations cut down the flow of information to higher headquarters, or the statements open to distortion or misinformation might have been caught in time and excised. As it turns out, Coulson traded Dodd's life for a propaganda weapon that was far more valuable to the communists than the lives of their prisoners of war. Two side things that should be kept in mind, though. Had they used force, there is a very real possibility that there would be reprisals against the POWs held by the Chinese and the North Koreans. And also, since the communists did get some of what they wanted, it may, I say, since I can't know, may soften later resistance in the camps. At 8th Army headquarters, Van Fleet sort of discounted the importance of Coulson's letter to the communist POWs, but the powers that be in Washington had real concerns over things like the phrase, "I can assure in the future that PW can expect humane treatment." Could that not be interpreted as saying there has been inhumane treatment up to now, or promising no more forcible screening or rearming the PW in this camp? Surely that implies that there has been rearming of prisoners, which there has not, and forcible screenings were already canceled. Obviously, the press is hungry for news about all of this. New UN Commander Mark Clark wants to publish a statement, and he does, and it includes the prisoners' demands and Coulson's response, which may not have been the wisest course of action, since it has a pretty unfavorable reception, and the communist delegates at Panmunjom, of course, make full use of the propaganda opportunity, which I will talk about next week. Dodd also releases a statement, which is just an account of his capture and release. At 2nd Logistical Command, Paul Yount puts together a team to investigate things, and they decide Dodd and Coulson are blameless. But Van Fleet is starting to think maybe that's not the case. He decides Dodd did not conduct himself properly, and his recommendations to Coulson had been faulty, and he recommends that Coulson get an administrative reprimand, but that administrative action be taken against General Francis Dodd. Mark Clark takes this even further. Generals Dodd and Coulson are busted down to colonels, and Yount gets the reprimand for not catching the errors in the Coulson letter. The Department of the Army approves all of this. The quick and summary punishment of the key officers involved did not solve the problem of what to do about Coulson's statement or the more basic question of how to clean up the long-standing conditions in the prison camps. Although the Washington leaders did not want to repudiate the letter, they told Clark to deny its validity on the grounds that it was obtained under duress, and Coulson had not the authority to accept the false charges contained in the communist demands. The first count is no doubt true, but the second was certainly not. We'll see if that is enough to satisfy the press, but I personally wouldn't bet on it. I read last week in the conclusion what Pravda had to say about the affair, which was that it revealed that Koje was a death camp, like those of the Nazis in World War II. Other papers in communist countries say pretty much the same thing, and obviously the rest of the world knows these accusations. Americans, snorting their disbelief, forgot that few of them had believed the rumors about Belsen and Dachau either until they were proved. Russians, who had in 1941 considered Germany among the most civilized of nations, whatever their fascist politics, undoubtedly believed, as did devout communists everywhere. But the real loss of face was before the neutrals, who did not know what to believe. There's something else going on that's been pretty big all month, or well, all spring really, that's also causing some loss of face, but I haven't had time to cover it so far in May because of Koje-Do and all. Remember the February accusations by the communists that the UN was engaging in germ and chemical warfare? Right. Well, the campaign widened in 1952 to include confessions by American airmen that they had participated in germ warfare bombings. This was not accidental, for the Soviet representatives in North Korea reprimanded the North Koreans and Chinese communists for failing to produce a better propaganda case on bacteriological warfare, according to an American intelligence report. As it turns out, the Chinese hold two American airmen as POWs, Ken Enoch and John Quinn, whose B-26 was shot down back in January. After many weeks of interrogation, they have been broken and have given the communists what they wanted, in both writing and on film, saying the U.S. began planning bacteriological war against North Korea last August and began actual such operations January 3rd. On May the 6th, Pravda began publishing daily articles about this as the start of a real global propaganda campaign. Tape recordings of the confessions were widely circulated. The two lieutenants were subject to a mass interview with Chinese and Korean newsmen and scientists that stretched over 10 days, highlights of which were made into a documentary movie. One thing that has happened this spring because of these confessions is that prior to this, the communists treated captured ground and air personnel the same. And after this, any captured airmen are singled out for treatment designed to produce more such confessions. I will have more to say about all this in a week or two because it is an ongoing and developing process. I would like to get back to Mark Clark taking over UN Command. Clark has a real checkered past. During World War II, he was the U.S.'s youngest four-star general. He did a lot of the planning for Operation Torch as Dwight Eisenhower's deputy. That was the Allied landings in Northwest Africa, which paved the way for finally clearing that continent of Axis troops and setting up for the invasions of Sicily and Italy proper. But he has a fair share of controversy, notably being connected with the Rapido River disaster in January 1944, which you can go look up on my World War II channel, which covered that conflict in real time, just like I'm doing with this one. Congressional hearings in 1946 on that battle referred to the battle as one of the most colossal blunders of the Second World War, a murderous blunder that every man connected with this undertaking knew was doomed to failure before it took place. Further, the resolutions charged Lieutenant General Mark W. Clark with a clear disregard for human life and military information. Clark, they alleged, ordered the attack even though he knew it was going to fail with horrendous losses, even after his subordinates had voiced their misgivings and offered alternative suggestions for attacks elsewhere that could and later did succeed. The petitioners urged Congress to investigate not just the Rapido River fiasco, but to take the necessary steps to correct a military system that will permit an inefficient and inexperienced officer, such as General Mark Clark, in a high command to prevent future soldiers from being sacrificed wastefully and uselessly. To be fair to Clark, he did get plenty of experience after that in 1944 and 1945. But we'll get to know him over the coming weeks, since he is now in charge. Here are a few words about something Matt Ridgway was involved in before he left. I talked a while back about the building and training of the ROK Army, the South Koreans. But here's a few more thoughts on that. Ridgway's disapproval of trying to increase its size to 20 divisions from 10 had prevented that from becoming a thing. But what about ROK Air and Marine Forces? See, the ROK Air Force is very small and has only propeller planes. What did he think of that? In Ridgway's view, a 4,000-man Air Force with 17 obsolete fighters and 29 miscellaneous craft could offer no real opposition to a future communist sweep and would probably be wiped out quickly. Maintenance of a tiny, impotent Air Force was wasteful, Ridgway continued, since in the event of renewed aggression, the United States would still have to provide air support for the ROK. A second-best Air Force is worse than none, he told the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But the UN commander found it was next to impossible to abolish a service once it gained a firm foothold. The Joint Chiefs showed no disposition to tamper with the ROK Air Force, and no action was taken on Ridgway's recommendation. He also wanted to get rid of a South Korean Marine Force after the war, and he got pretty much the same reception. He thinks it requires separate overhead, separate support elements, which basically copy those of the Army, and that would be paid for by the American taxpayers. So why do that? However, already back in February, the U.S. Navy set up naval and marine advisory groups to the ROK, so he was shut down on this. Also, about a month ago, I talked about ammunition and the UN lack thereof. It's kind of a crisis, but they do have an ammunition issue and have had to cut down on artillery expenditures. There was a huge stockpile of ammunition left over after World War II, and by now it's apparent that that has been both a blessing and a curse. Obviously, it was a huge supply the U.S. could use to meet this war's demands when it began and unfolded. However, the imbalance of its stocks has gone unnoticed, and the very mass of the stockpile had introduced a dangerous sense of complacency. The expectation of a short war had fostered this complacency and permitted the rebuilding of the defunct ammunition industry to be delayed. Compounding the situation, the lack of industrial mobilization that followed the outbreak of the war led to further setbacks in the battle for ammunition production. But those imbalances have been revealed, and a lot of them happen to be in mortar and howitzer ammunition. And that happens to be what is most needed for the artillery war now that the field war has gone static. A lower daily rate of fire will help to rectify the problem, but that also brings complaints from the men at the front who want protection and support. And that brings it all to the attention of Congress and the American public. So it is an issue. But the real issue, of course, is time. Until production can get to the level where it meets not only current needs, but also replenishes stocks, it will be a crisis. Rationing is a temporary expedient, to be sure, but shortages and rationing kind of have to be the rule just now. The disadvantages of fighting even a small war without an adequate production base in being or capable of quick expansion are readily discernible in the ammunition situation of 1951 and 1952. Feeding the hungry maw of the Far East Command drained the reserves in the United States and led to reductions in allocations for the Army units in Europe. An expansion of the war might well have been catastrophic, for no amount of money or effort could buy the most priceless commodity, time. Luckily, though, the communists don't have a desire to broaden the war and enlarge the fight in the field. So U.S. supply is at least mostly sufficient to maintain the status quo until new production can pick up the slack. And while maintaining the status quo, stuff is happening. There is some action in the field as the 20th Philippine Battalion Combat Team launches a series of raids starting yesterday against the Chinese west of Chorwan. That is part of a stop-and-start series of raids and skirmishes called the Battle of Hill Erie, which I'll talk about more soon enough. U.S. 2nd Division gets its turn to go off the line, and 40th and 7th Divisions take over its territory, which is in the area below the Iron Triangle. 2nd heads for Kapyong, where it is spread to several places to perform the usual Reserve Division operations. It's not like they get a real rest. I mean, they have 4,466 replacement guys for men rotated out of service, and they have to be trained. They have a new commander, too. James Fry took over from Robert Young back on the 4th, to much pomp and ceremony. With the easing of combat pressure at the front, pomp and ceremonies were rapidly returning. Units remained stable for long periods now, and everywhere flagpoles went up, rocks were painted, and areas policed and improved. Divisions built show-top war rooms out of plywood and stationed MPs with burnished stainless steel helmets outside them. Bands, no longer needed to carry wounded and the like, could indulge in concerts, while more and more troops, with less and less to do, could be kept busy on the fiddling details normal to garrison life. And here I will leave you for the week. With the new commander in the theater, a couple of generals no longer generals, some of the aftermath of Koje-Do, and accusations of germ warfare that an awful lot of people believe. Because they do, Chemical warfare, bacteriological warfare. Tens of millions of ordinary people in communist countries around the world believe those forced confessions, and they get scared, they get angry. What does that mean for the war? What does that mean for the rest of the 1950s? When the ordinary people of one country fear and hate the ordinary people of another country who didn't do anything to them, and vice versa. It means that peace might not be coming for quite some time. After all, peace is not exactly profitable in 1952, is it? And making YouTube history videos is not exactly profitable in 2026. To ensure that we can continue to do this sort of stuff, please join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. That is what lets us do it. And Juan Rodriguez Forero is the Army Member of the Week here. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.